It's football and other F words, and we got a lot to get to today as we talk Tennessee Titans training camp and the edge position review. Going to go real fast. My name is Zach Lyons at F Words Pod. He's Mike Herndon at Mike Herndon NFL. He's Stoney Keeley at Stoney Keeley. Brought to you by Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville, Tennessee, making you forget the night before for over 50 years. Make sure to join the Best of Bluegrass mailing group for special items that go on sale and exclusive access to events that go on with them as well. Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Football is back, so I wanted to get straight into talking about football. We have press conferences to talk about. We have all these interesting side topics and everything. And then, of course, we're going to end on talking about the edge position group. But first, not only are we all healthy right now, but the Tennessee Titans are heading into training camp with just 2 players on the PUP. Colton Dow's on the long-term PUP. NPF had a cleanup surgery on his knee, and he's only going to be out for a couple of days. So, Mike, I'll start with you. We've covered a lot of these podcasts. We've done a lot of these training camps over the years, and they seem to be filled with injury intrigue, if you will. And while Harold Landry and Daniel Brunskill were not there today, everybody else was, and everybody else is healthy. I mean, is that just a sign of the times that maybe the injury luck is finally turning around?
I'm not willing to say that yet. I want to say last year they were pretty healthy heading into camp. Now I think after, and they even may have been pretty healthy heading into the season last year, if I recall correctly. But I don't know. I'm not really willing to say that the injury bug is behind them until we see them get through camp at the very least, and maybe through a couple weeks.
Stoney, did the buzzword of dynamic movement and stretching, did that get you going? Did that turn you on and make you think that, hey, those fancy words that mean very little and are very well known, those fancy words don't mean as much as what people are making it out to be?
Well, I'll tell you one thing, Zach. I saved this joke specifically for football and other F words. I didn't want to drop it on the Hot Read podcast, but I think I need one of those devices that they were talking about that like measures the GPS movement and like tells them when a guy's about to redline. I need that for when me and my wife have a good date night and things, take up a notch. And she says, "Don't stop, Stoney, keep going." And I have a device to point to and say, "I'm redlining, babe. I gotta slow down a little bit." That's my takeaway from all that, the advent of this technology.
Zach Woodfin's going to come out of the...
not where I was expecting that to go.
She's going to kill me. She's going to kill me for saying that on a podcast too, by the way.
Yeah.
But listen, I'm 38 years old.
Rightfully so.
I've gained a lot of weight since we started dating. Things are different now, all right? You got to approach it with a more analytical mind, and I think that's what I need to get my hands on some of that technology for.
I like the idea that Zach Woodfin just jumps into the room and is like, "Hey, Stoney, you're redlining. You got to get out of here. You got to sit out a few reps."
Yeah. That's what I need.
Speaking of weight, Tavondre Sweat, contrary to popular belief, did not look like one of the humans from Wall-E being carted in on a hover cart. I know that really pissed off a very small contingent of the media side of Titans coverage. But that really, between that and L'Jarius Sneed practicing, I don't know what Stillman's going to bitch about for 4 hours. So that'll be very interesting to see what kind of creativity he can come up with there. I'm sure he'll create some nonsense out of thin air. Probably Big Jeff being soft for 4 hours. Big Jeff just soft.
They don't have a right tackle, Zach.
Not according to what my Titans media sparrows have told me. John Ojukwu, yet again, RT1. Titans media members are not allowed to say that are at practice to the public. So at least they're not allowed to tweet it today. So my Titans media sparrows, I'm communicating forth from the ether that it was RT1 was John Ojukwu with NPF gone, and RG1 was, of course, still Sadiq Charles. So the same stuff that we saw in pajama practices carried over to training camp.
Zach, do you know
real quick any takeaways on that?
Well, I just want to ask real quick, do you know of any podcasts covering the Titans that might have mentioned that Sadiq Charles and John Ojukwu might be the starting combo on the right side?
Well, I'm sure other podcasts will suddenly pop up and take all the credit. So they'll act like
Just
they're
wondering.
at first, kind of like what they did with the Josh Wiley tight end one take. But they heard it here first. In fact, they've heard probably about John Ojukwu longer than anybody from you, Stoney, over if they are subscribers at
I love him.
stackingninbox.com. So, but this has been a Pro Ojukwu podcast, but we were a little bit behind you last year. But this has been a Pro Ojukwu podcast between me and Mike. Obviously, Sadiq Charles, John Ojukwu have been doing really well. Now, as far as whatever they're doing in practice, in these drills, in these meetings, are they're doing really well. What they're doing, I guess, in practices and stuff, it's kind of hard to tell. I don't know where the sacks are coming from. I think probably maybe even TD may have a good list, or A to Z typically has a good list. So I haven't been able to check those out. They have those day one drive by drive, kind of deals. So I haven't been able to check those out. So those may be out there at this point.
I've seen TD tweeting about it.
Yeah.
A couple sacks.
So I know there's been some sacks, but we got a lot to get to. So I kind of am all over the place. So let's just stick with the offensive line real quick. Where are you at? NPF is, of course, missing a few more practices yet again. Now they're not considering it a big deal, but obviously it can be a big deal because that's not reps. You're not taking reps. So, Mike, I'll start with you. Where are you at on how close the RT battle is between NPF and John Ojukwu? Because I'm not even going to include any of the other guys, because at this point, none of them has been able to unseat John Ojukwu. It feels like it's NPF and John Ojukwu who's clearly ahead of everybody else.
I don't think we're going to be able to know at all what this battle really looks like until NPF is back in the mix. Because to me, he's still like the most physically talented guy in this group. I think Ojukwu actually, frankly, is close, because I do think he's got really good movement skills. He's got good length. Played really well at Boise State, obviously. So I think Ojukwu is a real contender at this point for that spot. But until NPF, who does have some skins on the wall, who did we go back and forth a little bit on NPF, right? That like his rookie season I go back and forth on NPF because his rookie season was not good. Like, it's not like he played well, but there was enough flashes of good play in there that I'm like, I still hitting into last year was like, there could be a good player in there. Now, if we're going to give like other guys the benefit of the doubt for having to deal with Jason Hoteling and Keith Carter and everything else like that, we should give him the benefit of the doubt too with that. So I'm at least intrigued to see what he looks like with Bill Callahan and hopefully healthy and everything like that. But until he's in the mix, I hesitate to really like put a lot of stock in the rotations that we're hearing from camp. I think, Ojukwu certainly is higher than what maybe we would have thought going into the offseason. But besides that, I think that's kind of all we know right now.
Stoney, Mike Keith put him as a sleeper to watch, John Ojukwu. He mentioned John Ojukwu a lot on the OTP podcast.
Did he get his name right this time?
I'm not sure. I didn't listen to it.
He keeps calling him
information. I don't listen to OTP a lot, so this is secondhand information from an article I read.
He keeps calling him John Ojukwu, and I listen to the podcast, and it drives me nuts. And get the man's name right.
Maybe he just can't pronounce that W for whatever reason.
And to be fair, Mike Keith is the last person on the planet that I want to start podcast beef with. I love Mike Keith.
Could he be the one pronouncing it right, and we're all pronouncing it wrong?
It's a silent W. And, he is with the team. You would think he does have inside sources that I would not have. So maybe it is. It's a silent W. I don't know.
There you go. But him talking about that, I mean, obviously you have, the Josh Wiley propaganda that keeps popping up all over Tennessee Titans website. He's featured almost every time they do something. Is there something to this John Ojukwu? I'm gonna go with Mike Keith. I'm gonna have to side with Mike Keith on this one. This Fair John enough. Ojukwu. Is there a hype train that has some real legs to it?
Yes, I would say so, and I will tell you why exactly. I think the differentiator between John Ojukwu and Nicholas Petit-Frere is the scheme that we presume that Bill Callahan is going to implement for this team. I think He looks for offensive linemen that are a little more powerful. I think there's going to be a little less zone, which NPF is kind of tailor-made for with his athletic traits, his gifts there. He's a great move guy. And to Mike's point, I think he's the one guy in this race that does have meaningful NFL experience at a pretty good level, at least for a few games. But what I think John Ojukwu has that NPF doesn't have is an element of power, an element of run through you, an element of pancaking the guy. There were instances of it on his tape at Boise State. And I think that length and that power that John Ojukwu has is what's going to end up differentiating him from NPF in the race. And I think with Bill Callahan and this scheme running a little more power, a little more move dude football, I think he's a better fit for what they want to do on offense. And I think as long as he keeps on this trajectory of doing everything that they're asking him to do, which is what Brian Callahan said of him in a media availability earlier this offseason, if he keeps doing that, I think he's going to be undeniable, and it's going to dig too deep of a hole for NPF to crawl out of.
Certainly possible. I mean, 2 days. He needs to be out there quick. He needs to be out there quick if he wants to be a part of this battle, I think.
I agree.
Well, we'll get into some more practice news and notes and all that kind of stuff, but let's talk about some of maybe the press conference stuff that I found interesting, that you guys found interesting. I'm going to start with kind of like the Rand Carr. I'm not going to really rehash the Derrick Henry, he said, she said, all kind of that bull crap. Because, I mean, you can go listen to a football show, you can go to Stack in the Inbox, read thoughts on that and all that kind of stuff. But what I do want to do is focus on a different aspect of contract talk, and that is they have pretty much kind of confirmed yesterday that they have been talking about a DeAndre Hopkins extension. It's something that we haven't really talked about on the show, but has been a big talking point on a bunch of radio shows and radio topics for weeks now. Something that we kind of just said in passing and stuff like that. But he's identified a lot of extension guys, and one of those guys is Ryan Stonehouse, who is due up for an extension, and he is healthy. Some other guys that could be possibly extension candidates. I mean, they have a lot of contracts ended in 2024, by the way, but go ahead.
Stonehouse is an extension eligible.
An RFA,
right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. His contract's over in 2024. This is his last year of his contract. Besides being an ERFA tender or something like that.
Yeah, he'll be an RFA, so they can effectively keep him for pretty cheap.
They could, but I mean, just go ahead and give him an extension. I mean, why just fucking fool around?
But I don't think they can sign the extension until after this season. I think you have to play 3 years.
Well, that's fine. I mean, we're now talking semantics, and we've gotten bogged down in something that doesn't really matter. Because I'm not here to talk about the Ryan Stonehouse extension. I'm here to talk about other players that could possibly have extensions coming up. Jack Gibbons, who also probably falls in this old category as well. But Sadiq Charles is a guy that is obviously fighting for a contract, an extension. And, I mean, obviously we don't know if he's worth an extension. There's guys, that kind of fall into that category. Tyler Boyd's kind of one of those guys and everything. Nick Westbrook is an extension candidate technically. But really, when he says that they've identified all these extension candidates, it really seems to me to be speaking a lot towards DeAndre Hopkins, but I think there is a possibility that a guy like Elijah Molden could be a low-end extension. We're not talking they have to have all these like big high-end extensions or anything. But DeAndre Hopkins, where are you guys at on he's 31? No, I think he's about to be 32, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Beats me. You're asking the wrong guy if you want facts and information.
He's already 32. He just turned 32 back in June.
Yeah.
So DeAndre Hopkins obviously still has something in the tank, right? Like last year, he was really good on a team with a really bad offensive line, which kind of trickles down to the wide receiver, and it can affect that too with a rookie quarterback, all this stuff. With T. Higgins likely hitting free agency, because I don't think Brandon Ayuk is going to hit free agency. I do think the San Francisco 49ers get a deal done. With T. Higgins likely hitting free agency, where are you guys at on DeAndre Hopkins? I mean, did you take what's known if he stays pretty relatively healthy through most of the year like he did last year, and he has for most of his career, has been a relatively dependable, healthy guy? Where are you at on extending a 32-year-old wide receiver, keeping in mind that he still has about $2 million a year in signing bonus. And then there is some guaranteed salary bonus that also has been prorated as well, it looks like up in here. So we're talking about roughly, I think, already $6 million needs to count for next year. So, Stoney, I'll start with you. Are you pro DeAndre Hopkins extension, or are you pro the unknown, the free agency in the draft?
I am pro DeAndre Hopkins extension. I actually don't know if I've said that on camera this offseason, but I am more than okay if this team wants to go ahead and get a deal done to keep him here in Nashville for years to come. Why? Well, for one, he's already got the chemistry built up with Will Levis, and we've seen that through 2023. He figures to be a big part of the offense in 2024. You don't have to start over with a new guy like T. Higgins, and frankly, I'm not sure how much of an upgrade T. Higgins is over DeAndre Hopkins, other than just considering the age. I think DeAndre Hopkins also plays a style of receiver that ages gracefully in the NFL. He's not a guy that relies solely on his physical talent to just run by cornerbacks to get open. He is more of a technical separator, savvy route runner, knows exactly when to break. No, he's a salesman. He knows exactly how to flare his arm, turn his head, move his hips, move his feet to get a cornerback to bite, to break the other way, to get open. He's got reliable hands. These are things that I think are going to age gracefully for DeAndre Hopkins. He's already got the good rapport with Will Levis that we've seen. You're adding talent around him, and you think about the implications of what he could produce in 2024 compared to what he produced in 2023, when he was basically the primary target for this offense and there was nobody around him. To supplement him with other pieces, complementary pieces, speed, that sort of stuff in the passing game, I think it's going to do wonders for Hopkins. I think he can still be productive for several more seasons. Why risk it starting over with a T. Higgins or somebody else? Just get the deal done and keep the man here. He seems to like Nashville. He seems to be having a good time. Why change things up? If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Some alcoholic breast milk here in Nashville, according
That's
to
right.
his Instagram.
That's right.
And he's alive, so he must have drank it. So that's where I'm at on that. If you want to know what we're talking about, you have to go to his Instagram account to see the harem of women, of hippie women, that I've told him that if he doesn't drink their breast milk, he will die. Mike, where are you at on the extension?
I love DeAndre Hopkins. Think he's great. I would not want to give him an extension before the season. After the season, if he continues to play well, absolutely would be up for talking about bringing him back, extending him in that time period between the end of the season and mid-March when he would officially become a free agent. But I wouldn't want to commit money before the season. I mean, we're still talking about, yes, he's been healthy, or he was healthy all of last year. But the 2 years prior to that, he had some injury issues. He was banged up, that kind of thing. He is 32 years old now. I just think you kind of let it play out on almost a year-to-year basis at this point with him. And if you can keep getting good stuff out of him, keep it going. But I just don't think – he's not going to break the bank next year at age 33 entering free agency. So – it's not like you can't re-sign him next year. I don't think that's an issue. Maybe you make the argument that, well, committing to him now, shows faith in him and shows, and motivates him to want to perform for the team, all that stuff. He's going to be motivated either way because he's either playing for another contract or he's playing for, out of, appreciation for already being extended. But I don't think him playing hard is going to be an issue. So, I don't know. I think it's I would rather wait and just take the cautious approach because they don't have a ton of cap space next year as it stands right now. I think they're at like 27 million or something like that, which isn't bad. But it's also not like a $80 million number like they entered this past offseason with. So I don't know. I'd probably wait and maybe see what the market looks like next year and make a decision from there.
According to Spotrac, they're at 38.8 million next year, almost 38.9 million.
Over the cap had a different number, if I recall correctly.
It's around 40 is the number I saw.
They may be using different NFL salary caps to start and all that kind of stuff. And I do know that eventually over the cap factors stuff rolls out of over the cap. Spotrac keeps theirs very well done as far as going from in the future. Over the Caps wildly changes all the time for whatever reason. I don't understand what that is.
Over the cap has them at 27 million, which is right in the middle of the pack among NFL teams. And where do they rank on Spotrac as far as
14th?
14th. Okay, so they're going to be in the middle of the pack in cap space. They're not in a bad situation, but they're also not going to be flush with money relative to their competitors. So I don't think you want to spend on a 33-year-old wide receiver before you kind of have to.
I'm kind of with. I'm a very much a build in the future kind of guy, but I understand the DNA of the Tennessee Titans and the wide receiver position being constantly in flux, and I like the idea of safe DeAndre Hopkins. So it's really kind of hard for me to say no to an extension. To me, I think I'm more apathetic about it in the sense that, by the way, base salary cap for over the cap was 260. Over here is 273.3 for.
So that's the majority of the difference.
Yeah. So anyway, but that was the difference. But I look at it and I go, man, I want to keep Hopkins, but I'm like just apathetic. If they don't do an extension with DeAndre Hopkins, I understand. If they do an extension with DeAndre Hopkins, depending on the money, I understand. It's just I don't think there's a clear yes or no, because obviously the draft should probably play an impact on it. Your outcome of the season should play an impact on the draft. Because if you're telling me if I could have Luther Burden or the kid from Arizona, McMillan, over or DeAndre Hopkins, I have to choose between them, which technically you don't have to. But if I had to choose between them, I'm choosing the younger guys. I'm not going to choose DeAndre Hopkins. I'm going to take the guy that can grow with Will Levis. So that's kind of where I'm at on the DeAndre Hopkins situation. But again, you can still sign DeAndre Hopkins, draft a wide receiver round one. It's just that this Tennessee Titans team just never seems to want to do that. It's like, it doesn't matter who the GM is. It just doesn't seem it's caked into their DNA to go sign a wide receiver, draft a wide receiver, same round. Unless you're talking about we sign, because they had it, right? They could have signed A.J. Brown and drafted Treylon Burks, but they traded away A.J. Brown, drafted Treylon Burks. When they had A.J. Brown, Corey Davis was out the door, and it was just Corey Davis and A.J. Brown. Pretty much Corey Davis is out the door, but it was just them two. And then you're like, well, that's just two rookies. Where's the veteran? And then the veteran was Adam Humphrey. So, at the end of the day, there's just constant rotation, and now they have three veterans. Where is the young blood? Because if you're asking me to trust in Treylon Burks, Jaquan Jackson, you can get it the hell out of here, because I don't trust either of them at this point.
But here's
I'm like, let's rotate something fresh in.
They need to get younger for sure. Because, Ridley's going to be 30 next year, which that's part of it too. Do you want a 33 and 30-year-old receiver leading the line for you next year? Probably not. But I do think that this regime has invested. They already went and got all these guys, plus having Treylon Burks, obviously, which, look, we've talked about the whole thing with Treylon Burks that you don't want to rely on him for anything. But I'll say this, this year's kind of like a free hit with Treylon Burks, right? You get a free hit at what does this guy look like with this new offense? Does he need a fresh start? Is him being in better shape going to make a difference?
And look, just because he's sucking in his gut in a Hooters.
No. I'm not talking about all that. I'm saying he's entering year 3. We've talked about maybe he wasn't a guy that meshed well with Mike Vrabel, who, obviously loved A.J. Brown, was clearly pissed that they traded him, and then was probably always compared to A.J. Brown, whether consciously or subconsciously in Mike Vrabel's mind. But maybe in a new regime with a fresh start, we get a better Treylon Burks. I'm not saying I'm counting on that, but if you sign Higgins now to an extension, you're basically saying we're not even considering that as an option. Whereas if you don't sign, or not Higgins, Hopkins, if you don't sign Hopkins before the season, and you let this thing play out. What if Burks does have a great year? Like, what if he is awesome in this fourth wide receiver role and looks like a guy that could be a part of the future moving forward? And then you can let Hopkins walk and have Ridley, Burks, and maybe a draft pick as your foundation. I think it keeps more options available on the table.
Let me say something, but can you see enough from Burks as a wide receiver 4 to make him to be comfortable with him as wide receiver 2? Like, is that realistically possible?
I mean, all 3 of those wide receivers are not going to play all 17 games. It's just highly unlikely that all those guys are going to be perfectly healthy all year. They're going to need Treylon Burks at some point, which is why I think it's crazy that, you know, everybody's so boned up about trading him away, you know, for anything at this point. And it's like, yeah, they're redlining on Treylon Burks trade, you know, fantasies. But Treylon Burks is depth. He's the best depth you've got at the wide receiver position. And I think he's going to play enough that you're going to be able to see whether he's taken meaningful step forward or if he's just still the same guy that like runs hot and cold, but mostly cold that we've seen the last 2 years. So I think it's worth just seeing. Just see. Use this 1 year to just see what you got.
Stoney, you watched a lot of Jamal Adams tape recently over at stackinginbox.com. We've talking ad nauseum about Jamal Adams a lot. So I want to shift over to, you know, the other day when asked about adding to the safety room, Rain Carthon says, well, you know, we need to add to a bunch of different positions. He kind of gave the non-generic or the very generic answer to the question. Today, this morning on RKW on 104.5, he said that he was specifically asked about the safety position. Do you need to add more to it? And he goes, we need to. And he was pretty emphatic about it. Fast forward a couple of hours later, Jamal Adams kind of lets it slip that he's been talking to Quandre Diggs, who I mean, we all kind of know that he's been talking to the Tennessee Titans. I would assume they've kicked the tires on Quandre Diggs, asked about his asking price, such as et cetera, et cetera. And he goes, I'm trying not to pressure him. So that means that there is like an offer. He made it sound like there's maybe a pretty good offer on the table or an offer worth considering. So they add Quandre Diggs, Stoney. And because you watched a lot of Jamal Adams, you probably caught a cursory glance at Quandre Diggs. What are your thoughts on what Quandre Diggs can bring alongside Jamal Adams and can bring alongside Amani Hooker? But also, what does that mean for Elijah Molden? Because we talked last week on the show where you were gone that what is with this fan base wanting to get rid of depth? Like, the people want to cut Elijah Molden. They don't think he's going to make it when you need depth. And Quandre Diggs is 31 years old, has stayed very healthy. He's kind of like DeAndre Hopkins in that sense. He's an older statesman that has stayed very, very healthy. But with Jamal Adams and Amani Hooker both also having injury issues, I mean, what does that say? What does Quandre Diggs, what's the ripple effect of Quandre Diggs on the safety room?
So first of all, I think that Quandre Diggs is still a good football player. And that was one thing as I was watching the Jamal Adams tape, I actually tweeted, can they just go ahead and sign Quandre Diggs too while they're at it? Like, I want him in the two-tone blue this season. I think it's depth. I still don't think that whoever they sign is going to be the guy that's primarily on the field. And I don't know. My feelings have kind of changed about Elijah Molden and how they view him, because they are kind of approaching the position with a sense of urgency at this point in the game. I think it's more about depth and having guys that you can count on to still make plays. I think it's more about the Matthew Jacksons and the Mike Browns and the Anthony Kendalls. No offense to those guys. I know we've beaten the shit out of them in past episodes of this show. But I think it's more about those guys than it is Elijah Molden, truthfully, because when we start doing the math on nickel packages, dime packages, all this stuff, you get to a situation where you're not too far away from having to play that fourth safety. And you are one injury away from having to rely on that guy to be a consistent player. So I think it is more about depth. I still don't think, and I didn't think this about Jamal Adams after watching the tape. Hand up, admittedly, I did when the signing was announced. I'm like, oh my God, what a choice to be the guy for this safety room. But you watch the tape and you think there's no way anybody in their right mind is going to ask him to hang deep with some of these guys. He's got a specialized role with the defense. Presume that it's
line him one-on-one with Tyreek Hill.
I don't think so. I don't think so. And if they do, I don't think we have to worry about.
He's as
Denard
fast
Wilson.
as advertised, though. That's what's
well,
out
that's
on Titans
yeah.
media. He's as
I
fast
saw
as
that.
advertised.
What are we advertising though? He ran 4.56 out of the combine when he was 21 years old.
Touche. Yeah. So I don't think he's going to be the guy, and I don't think Quandre Diggs would be the guy either. What I think he can do that Adams can't, and how he would be a nice complement to the safety room, is that he is a little rangier. He can play a little bit deeper. He still has more of an element of speed, straight line, raw speed that Adams has, and he's particularly impressive because of that aggressive mindset that we've seen in these other defensive backs that they've brought in. Like Quandre Diggs is still a guy that's going to crash the play, make the tackle. He's very sound in that regard. And I thought Rand said something interesting in his press availability the other day too, before training camp started. Just kind of a little note in passing about Hooker. Just said something, he can play both positions, talking about free safety and strong safety. And when I was going back and watching some of the tape from the Titans 23 season, doing the Jack Gibbons film study for Friday, I noticed they put Amani Hooker at linebacker a lot more than I realized they did. So what I think it's about is having four guys that you can trust to fill a role on the defense when called upon, and having a little bit of depth beyond relying on guys that have very little NFL experience. So I'm not too worried about it. I still really like Elijah Molden. I'm not ready to pull the plug on him yet. I think they're adding supplemental pieces in that rotation.
Yeah. I want to get into, because we got so much to get into. So I think that covers Quandre Diggs pretty well. So
no, I'll say
Mike,
I disagree.
I
and say
something about Quandre Diggs. Why you got to say anything about Quandre Diggs?
Because I think Diggs is immediately their best safety to me, like above Amani Hooker.
Better than Hooker?
Immediately their best safety if they sign him tomorrow.
Oh man, you're a hater.
I'm not a hater. I think.
Okay,
I mean, how many Pro Bowls does Amani Hooker have?
I don't know. How many does I don't even know how many Quandre Diggs has.
Quandre Diggs has 3 in the last 4 years.
Well, good for him. Good for him. He played on a really good team that has really good recognition and visibility.
He's a good player. Yeah, he's a good player.
So is Amani Hooker.
No, Amani Hooker's fine. I'm not hating him. I just think
you hate him.
He's a very good player.
It's very clear you prefer a 50-year-old to Amani Hooker. So I thought it was interesting that he talks about him and Anthony Robinson both talked about kind of rotating the roster. They're going to be it seems to me that they're going to be churning out the roster fairly quick in the coming weeks. They're going to give a guys a lot of leash, but it does seem that they're talking about the 7th spot claim, on the waiver wire and all this stuff. And they're talking about, we could do this, we could do that. We're going to be looking around. We're going to be talking to teams saying they got an excess of one position. We have an excess at this position, which I don't know what position that is, that anybody's going to want anything from, but sure, whatever. So I guess maybe some like Quentin Bohanna in quotation marks, trade for some other version of Quentin Bohanna on another team. And so, Mike, how much roster movement do you actually expect compared to years past? Because John Robinson and Mike Vrabel did churn it out. And last year, the roster kind of was stagnant throughout the offseason, like training camp-wise. But John Robinson was a big churner of that bottom of the roster.
Yeah, I would imagine we see quite a bit. I mean, it is beneficial that you've got that 7th overall waiver claim spot. You have a decent chance to get some guys that maybe you highly value that do get cut for whatever reason, whether it be just depth or numbers or not, a good fit or whatever with other teams. You're not I think we've all got to be realistic about what the waiver claims are going to be. I mean, we're not talking about you're going to find a starter out there. You're going to find a guy that can be like the 4th or 5th guy in that group that is better depth than what you currently have, which is not going to be that hard to do.
You're going to find slightly better Mike Brown.
Yeah, you're gonna find a slightly better Mike Brown or a slightly better, I don't know, Rashad Weaver or or Thomas Rush. Like these are the kind of guys that are going to be like you're going to slightly upgrade on those guys. You're not
The
getting
cap casualties, because the salary cap is so high, the cap casualties are rarely there in the summer. Like we went through that whole list a couple episodes ago. I read a whole list to Mike of the cuts that were made in like June from July to August, and they were just like a bunch of nobodies. I mean, it's just bad.
And also the salary cap casualties are not going to be subject to waivers either, right? Like those are going to be vested veterans who are not going to go to waivers. They're going to get to pick their next team. So now, and they may pick the Titans because they offer the most or have the most opportunity or whatever. But like you said, those are going to be few and far between. And usually those are going to be guys that are in their 30s and stuff like that are, on bloated contracts. And that's why they're available.
Let's see. Let's just get into it. It's sweat time. It's time to sweat it out. We haven't talked about T'Vondre Sweat a lot on this show. We hardly ever mention him. He's the least important person on this team. Nobody ever talks about T'Vondre Sweat anywhere. But we do need to talk about T'Vondre Sweat. And I want to start with this because I meant to mention it last week, and I off air, I told Mike I told Stoney about it. He was on a podcast, which, by the way, is one of the worst produced, chaotic podcasts I've ever watched. And it was like an hour and 40 minutes, and 10 of those minutes was no audio whatsoever, just video, no audio, and they kept it in. I can't remember.
Your description of that podcast sounds exactly like the maiden voyage of what ultimately became this podcast. That happened at your house when we'd all been drinking for a long time and just went downstairs to record.
It was friends from high school. They have a podcast, which I think maybe focuses on video games, probably on times that he wasn't there. But he was the week that he was doing his youth football camp. He brought his two brothers. He came on the show, brought two of his brothers, brought another kid who I think is his little brother, but I couldn't really place if he was or not, but he was a kid that was at the camp. And then in the middle of the podcast, two people just walk in, and we have about 8 people on the podcast and 3 mics. So it was pure chaos. And they spent most of the time. Yeah, go ahead.
It did seem like it probably would have been really fun to have been in the room for that recording.
Oh, yeah. Probably not great if everybody had a mic. Like, if everybody had a mic, that would have been a great... Because they were asking questions, but nobody could hear each other because they were all talking across the room and over each other. It was nuts. There were a few tidbits from it that I thought was interesting. His approach, and I think this speaks to what you can expect from T'Vondre Sweat, because I think T'Vondre Sweat, as we all know, is the Antichrist, and he's completely lazy, and he's a fat slob, according to 5 people. Okay, so like he's this awful human being. But those of us with a level head and understand that there are eccentricities to every youth growing up, every 21-year-old is weird. T'Vondre Sweat is very business forward, and we're not getting political, so agree or disagree, but he has a definite leaning towards one of the candidates that he's not shy to talk about. And it's because of the money. And he's blunt. He's like, I want to do what's best for my wallet. And one of the things that we talked about on this show and that they talked about on the press conference after drafting T'Vondre Sweat is that Brian Callahan said, we made sure to emphasize that being out of shape, being overweight affects your wallet. So I'm connecting all these dots to say he is focused because his main goal this year is to be Defensive Rookie of the Year. He said it on that podcast. He says, I want to be Defensive Rookie of the Year. We already heard that he says, if I get down to 345, I'm a Hall of Fame player. And for all the talk about his focus is on doing what's best for his family. He mentioned he wants to play for 10 years. He's been hanging out with DeAndre Hopkins a lot, which DeAndre Hopkins trash talk came up today. So there's the familiarity between those two, is that DeAndre Hopkins was trash talking T'Vondre Sweat because they are familiar and hanging out together. We know that Jeffrey Simmons has been reaching out and talking to T'Vondre Sweat as well. All this to say is that as we get and start talking about these practices, start talking about these tapes and all this stuff, you should know that T'Vondre Sweat's mentality is to win awards and make money. And while that may sound selfish, that is really good for your team. Like, that is really good for a prospect to have that mindset that says, I know I have to do this if I want to make big money. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Mike, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of this Sweat stuff has just turned into hysteria within segments of the fan base. He's the most overanalyzed second round pick in the history of this franchise. I'm pretty confident in that at this point. I just think everything you heard about him, and I'm pretty close with, like, as far as following the Texas program. You didn't hear anybody say a bad word about T'Vondre Sweat the last 2 years. Now, earlier in his career, had some issues. He'll admit that. He said that publicly. The team has said that publicly. But over the last 2 years, 100% well-liked within the program by the coaches, by the players, his teammates, by other people in the building, treats people with respect. Just a popular guy within the team, and busted his ass and played well and won the Outland Trophy as the best interior lineman in the country on either side of the ball.
At 390 pounds, by the way. That's
all he accomplished over the last 2 years, and led Texas to having one of the best, if not the best, run defenses in the country last year. Those are his accomplishments. Everything else is noise at this point. It is just speculation and nitpicking and overanalyzing. And to me, I have zero doubt.
Mike, Tracy Rocker put his hands on his hip. That means that he's pissed off. Even though his hands were on his hip the whole time watching that entire, all those other guys.
Yeah, his body language looked like he was coaching. That's what that body language is. Coaching in the heat, in the middle of July. Yeah, it's ridiculous how much discussion there's been about this man, frankly. And I hope he just goes out and balls out and proves everybody wrong. And he deserves to talk all the shit he wants once he does that. And I hope he does, frankly, because I think this guy has been treated incredibly shittily by a lot of people during the pre-draft process, during the post-draft process. And frankly, I'm kind of sick of it. So I'm rooting for T'Vondre Sweat more than just about anybody on this football team right now.
Criticized
Stoney,
Mike.
where are you at on hearing all that stuff?
I'm fucking sick and tired of it, man. I mean, it is. He's criticized by people that, mind you, to add to what Mike was saying, probably didn't go back and watch a single fucking down of Texas Longhorns football tape from 2023 to see what this guy is capable of. I love T'Vondre Sweat. I had him at 36 overall on my big board. If you were a subscriber to Stacking the Inbox, you got the draft guide. You know that. I've loved the guy. I love the attitude. I love the mindset that he has demonstrated in interviews that the Titans have vetted, that they've said publicly, like, we feel confident in the guy. A lot of this feels oddly personal to me. And Zach, you and I and our buddies at the Hot Read podcast were talking about this in the DMs earlier. Like, the interview today seems like a completely different person from the interview that we got from him on draft night in the Zoom call. He seemed like an exuberant, big personality, and now he seems a little guarded. And I don't fucking blame the guy, because people have been talking about nothing but how fat he is, how out of shape he is this whole summer, and it's not fair. And it's from people that, quite frankly, probably don't know fucking ball. So I'm sick and tired of it. I don't want to hear it anymore. He's here. He looks good. I'm ready to see him play and just prove all of the doubters wrong, because I'm in the camp that he can be a great player. I think he can be Defensive Rookie of the Year. He's got the running mate to do it next to Jeffrey Simmons. He's got the ability. A man of his size should not be moving as well as he does. That's the common denominator. You don't have to be some expert to understand that. This guy is a force. So we gotta stop all this. I'm here for it, man. I'm here for the T'Vondre Sweat revenge tour. I'm going to be right at his side with a switchblade and say, you point to somebody, T'Vondre. You point to somebody.
I love it. And let's say he showed up in shape. He's going through all the drills. Everybody's, and the fact that he's hanging out with DeAndre Hopkins, I think is great, because I think Hopkins is a great leader and a mature person with a great professional mindset for him to model himself after. I think he's surrounding himself with the right people, and like, I mean, shit. What more could you want from the guy at this point? Everyone thought he was not going to show up to camp, or like, you know, we didn't get a single headline about him being in trouble or do anything he wasn't supposed to do during the big 6-week break between OTAs and camp. We're here now. He's going through the full practice. Let's go. Like, let's play football now and watch him dominate, because that's where we're at.
He did talk a little bit trash about Nashville. He said it's really hard to find black people in Nashville, and I don't blame him there. He's very blunt about that. His mom visited for his birthday recently, and she put on her and the Instagram. She goes, I think I'm good on Nashville. She goes, I think I'm gonna stay living in Texas. So Nashville, not very popular among the Sweat family.
Well, listen, Nashville's a lot different than Houston. I mean, it's a lot different.
What was his exact quote? Like, they're there. You just got to find them.
You just got to find them. Yeah, you just got to look for them. You got to go
tough scene.
For them. Tough scene. So I do want to say this. So I don't know how many people know what a conditioning test is, but I would like to see some of these people talking about Sweat's conditioning to do the Ravens conditioning test, because the Ravens is they apparently have the hardest one. I don't know if you've ever heard about this, but players must run a total of 900 yards in 6 legs. Each set, so each leg, consists of 25 yards out and back 3 times. They must finish that heat of 150 yards under his designated time. For offensive and defensive linemen, can you tell me what is the most they can get without failing? The longest they have without failing. To do 100, to run 150 yards, 25 yards out and back, out and back, out and back.
And I don't know.
Well, let's say 20 seconds.
20 seconds. What do you think, Stoney?
I'm gonna say, I was leaning 30. I'm gonna say 25.
32 seconds. So they have 32 seconds. Do you think you could do it in 32 seconds? That's offensive and defensive linemen, by the way. And let me say this: it's 20 seconds. It's 27 seconds for wide receivers. So the fat boys only get 5 seconds longer. So that tells you how hard it is to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say I could do it, but I also have that like stupid level of confidence where I will, like pick up a sewing needle and be like, yes, I can tailor a suit right now.
I think everybody who has made comments in the media about Tavondre Sweat should have to do this test.
I would
just see if you could do it.
I'd like to try. I think I could maybe do it once. Maybe.
Yeah. It's kind of wild. I mean, 900 yards for that, you have to do it like under a minute and a half, basically 900 yards. Which seems insane.
The first leg, I think I could do it. There's not a chance in hell I'd be able to do it. The second, third,
you got to do all 3 legs in 32 seconds. All 3 legs. You have to run 50 yards in 32 seconds.
How much time is between the different?
I don't know. It doesn't say.
Though. Okay.
We got to recovery
time you get. Yeah. I have to fly in for.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay, so listen to this. What separates Baltimore is the change of direction by dividing up the sprints into 25 yards instead of 50 and 100 yards. So most teams do it 50 or 100. So maybe you have to do 100 yards 9 times, do 50 yards, 4.5 times, I guess, right? Was that my math right? No, 18 times. They do 25-yard legs. And players are cutting 5 times each leg. You can't slack off on any of the turns. If you don't put your foot in the ground and making the cut, you lose time and typically fluke. So it doesn't even matter. You may just have the wrong technique.
Yeah.
You may not even be out of shape. You may just have the wrong technique and fluke.
With 25-yard runs, there's no way I can do it in 30. What he said, 32 seconds.
Yeah, 32 seconds.
Right. There's not a chance in hell. I was thinking like longer runs to get to that, but no. No,
Yeah, it's pretty
25, there's
wild.
not a
I'll
chance.
post up this conditioning test. This was written back in 2020, but I do think it was very interesting that, I mean, apparently 900 yards is the conditioning test, but you have to figure out, I guess, as a team, how you want to distribute those 900 yards. And like he said, like this player said, it doesn't even matter if you're in shape or not. If you just slip, you could fluke.
I mean, anybody who's
So,
run suicides in basketball knows that the changing of the directions is the hard part of that.
yeah.
It's not the straight running. It is the changing of direction. It saps so much more energy than just straight.
I
I'll
want
tell
to
you
also
what.
talk about Sweat because the videos, people are back to day one dissecting every video like it's the Zapruder film, and they are JFK, video analysts, the FBI body language specialists are back, back in full swing. And here's what I'm going to say: we heard Tyke Tolbert earlier in the offseason, just about a month ago. It feels like 3 years ago. Talk about the Traylon Burks, Trevor Maddich situation. Trevor Maddich is shit all over Traylon Burks, and Tyke Tolbert's like, no, some guys are going through this. Everybody does drills a little bit differently. Some guys are slower. Some guys are teaching moments. All this kind of stuff. And we got people already saying that, well, Tavondre Sweat looks slow. Oh, he's out of shape. He should be doing this faster, when nobody knows what he's coached or told to do before he goes and does his part of the drill. Not everybody, we have it on tape from coaches. Not everybody practices the same in these kinds of drills and have to practice at the same speed. People are told different things. We have to keep that in mind. And also, nobody here, I mean, in general, it's kind of like when Quincy Avery got onto Sal last year about the throwing mechanics thing. Like, you guys don't have to analyze every freaking film and everything to make a sweeping declaration. Let's let the game play out. Let's watch the games and let's do it from there. I don't mind someone saying, oh, that looks pretty good, or maybe he needs to drop his hips, or maybe he needs to do this. But like making sweeping statements is where I get into it, and then acting like someone is out of shape or they're doing the drill wrong and all this stuff. Because let's not forget the infamous Derrick Henry video that gets shown every year of him fucking up, stepping over the bags or whatever. So again, just a kind of like a PSA. If you're not there, maybe you shouldn't be trying to analyze all the videos. Like, that's just kind of where I'm at on it. But I want to use that to jump into Sweat, where I have two pieces of information about Sweat's practice in team drills, because that's really what matters. And I'll start with what Sam Phelan has written on his notes from the first practice over at A2ZSports.com. It looked like a rough day for the Titans offensive line. There were at least 5, maybe closer to 10 run plays that would have been shut down for a loss of yards during the full team period. Tennessee's defensive front got consistent penetration. Mike, you talked about Tavondre Sweat being in the run defense. Stoney, you've talked about, getting the penetration from Tavondre Sweat and what he does next to Big Jeff. Sounds like so far it's already paying dividends, because what we have heard from my other Titans media sparrows, the TMS crew, the Titans media sparrows, that Tavondre Sweat was giving Lloyd Cushenberry all that he can handle.
Yeah.
Stoney, you just went on a big long rant about the haters. So let's enjoy, I guess, the likers. Is it the likers, the lovers of Tavondre Sweat?
We've had a few people in our corner on that one this spring too. So I do feel like it is a community here of Tavondre Sweat supporters. And I think for the time being, we can at least say so far so good, because man, Lloyd Cushenberry ain't some rookie undrafted free agent in there. It's Lloyd Cushenberry.
One of the Aaron Brewer.
Yeah, it ain't Aaron Brewer. It's Lloyd Cushenberry that he's in there winning reps over. And I think that is incredibly encouraging, because this is also a guy that didn't get a lot of run in OTAs and minicamp, and he's showing up on day one being a menace, which we know he can be.
Yeah. Yes.
Mike, what are your thoughts?
Cushenberry was the 4th center in the NFL as voted by NFL executives and coaches in ESPN's recent polls of those guys. it's not nothing that Sweat is out there day one of training camp pushing him around. And that's, I don't think it's a slight at Cushenberry. This is what Sweat did to everybody. This is what Sweat did to everybody in college. He did it to Alabama's offensive line. He did it to everybody's offensive line. He did it to Oklahoma's. He did it to everybody. He is a monster. He's immovable when he wants to be. And I think he's going to be like, look, we've talked about it. I think he's motivated. And I think people do not realize how good this guy can actually be. I just don't think people appreciate him. I retweeted a video that I just randomly popped in my feed on Twitter last night from Greg Cosell, talking about looking at T'Vondre Sweat's college tape. And he said his tape was so much better than Jordan Davis's. The Jordan Davis that went, 9 overall? That's the kind of player, that's the kind of tape he has. I just don't think people realize it. I don't know if it's just the stats or if people just have this vendetta against him for whatever reason, but I don't think people realize how good T'Vondre Sweat actually is, which is crazy considering he was the best player on a defense that was one of the better defenses in college football last year, and went to the college football playoff. So I don't know. I don't know what more he needs to do to prove it, but I think you're going to learn about him soon.
I wish Lloyd Cushenberry had been, available to the media, because I bet he would say something like, "Dude's a lot faster. Dude's fast for that size. His speed really took me by surprise," because that's really what it comes down to, is that people just don't understand just how quick 365 pounds coming at you at that speed, just how much of a handful that is. And that it was a handful when he was at 380 to 390 coming in that speed. And that's why he won the Outland Trophy. So now he's 25 pounds lighter, a little bit stronger, a little bit more focused, probably a little bit meaner. And there you go. So we're not here to take a victory lap in or anything like that. But just want to say that so far so good. I think you put it correctly in that so far so good, Stoney. Just real quick, 2 other rookies that had really good days today. Well, I don't know if JBL, Jarvis Brownlee, had a good day today, but I do know that he was playing on the outside a lot. He wasn't playing on the inside. He was playing on the outside a lot, according to my Titans Media Sparrows. So I thought that was interesting. And then Jalen Harrell, and this is from A to Z Sports Nashville. Jalen Harrell was everywhere during team period at Titans training camp today. Former Michigan Wolverines outside linebacker forced a fumble, had multiple quarterback pressures, and saw action against first-team offense. And that's with Harold Landry out. So it was presumed to be Arden Key and Jalen Harrell with the first-team defense in that spot. And I'm sure Jalen Harrell rotated in and out with maybe someone else. But Jalen Harrell was, I guess, 4th person up, not Tommy everybody's favorite guy, Tommy Rush. It was Jalen Harrell.
Well,
but this gets us into
third. He would have been ahead of Rashad Weaver, right?
We don't know. It just says. I mean, because there could have been times where the first team offense saw Rashad Weaver and Jalen Harrell, or Rashad Weaver and Arden Key. It just says he saw action against the first team offense. But that brings us into this conversation about the edge group. And one of the biggest questions out there is, where does the fucking sacks and pressure come from on this defense? We're talking about they lost in total players that are not on this defense anymore, 19 sacks. Not including the rookies that maybe have signed. They're getting roughly 8 out of the new defenders. So we still got about 11 sacks unaccounted for, which is close to what Danico Autry left on the table with 11.5 last year. Now, I don't know why Stillman put it as T'Vondre Sweat's burden to carry, that he has to replace the 11.5 sacks. But I think that's where I kind of want to jump off from, is that everybody talks about, well, who's going to replace 11.5 sacks? And I think the more I talk about it and think about it with you guys, and we discuss all this stuff with various people, is that there's going to be about 7 people that make up for that, because this Tennessee Titans defense is going to blitz more than it ever has under Mike Vrabel, because Mike Vrabel's never been a team that's been top 10 in blitz. And he's typically been at the bottom, and that's been fine because they can generate pressure with 4. And sometimes when you can generate pressure with 4, that's better. But you're talking about, when we talk about influences, Tampa Bay is the one that springs to mind for, I think, for all of us, because we don't really hear much talked about the Ravens defense from Denard Wilson. We hear a lot from Greg Williams and Todd Bowles, which they're connected and they all have history and all this stuff. So just real quick, 2019 through 2023, the Tampa Bay defense, that's Todd Bowles' defensive coordinator, then as head coach, they were top 10 in blitz rate and top 5 in 4 of those years and top 3 in 3 of those years. So they were top 10 every year, but they were top 3 of the years and top 5 4 of those 5 years. So that's a lot of blitzing from the Tampa Bay defense. Last year, their leading sack getter was Yaya Diaby, which tells you the state of what they had last year, and they were still 7th in sacks last year. They had the 7th most sacks in the NFL last year with 48. They've been top 10 every year in sacks. And then and then the Tennessee Titans have only been top 10 in sacks 1 year. So at the end of the day, this is going to be a team that blitzes. And I think we're all too focused on, well, who takes over the Danico Autry 11 sacks, when we should be asking, where is the pressure coming from? And obviously, this is where we are transitioning the edge group. We just talked about Jalen Harrell. We've talked about Rashad Weaver a little bit. But this edge class, the burden is not on the edge class alone to generate pressure in this defense. Am I right or wrong, Stoney Keeley?
I think you're right on that, and I think it is a matter of personnel. I love Harold Landry to death. I think, man, it's his 7th season. Like, Father Time comes for everybody at some point. Like, watching his tape in 2023, it felt like he was a little rockier getting out of his stance. Like, maybe the closing speed was starting to slow down a little bit. He's still a really strong, bendy pass rusher, strong hands, really good, smooth cross inside. But I think relying on him to be like Myles Garrett is going to prove to be unfruitful. I think Arden Key has a lot of promise as well. He is a scrapper. The dude plays hard, keeps his feet moving. He's active with his hands. He's got some good pass rush moves. But I think there are times when his frame just naturally lends itself to being stonewalled by a big, strong, sturdy offensive lineman. So I think you have 2 guys leading the pack that are pretty good, but I don't know that either of them are elite at this point in their career anymore. And then you've got a class of guys that you're hoping step up. Rashad Weaver, good power on tape, good, strong, sturdy base. I think he lacks a little bit of twitch in the change of direction department. And then the depth pieces, you're asking a Caleb Murphy, a Thomas Rush, a Jalen Harrell, Khalid Duke, TK McClendon. You're asking one of these guys to step up and fill a bigger role. And it's just a risky proposition when you're talking about guys that haven't really been proven NFL guys. So I do think to replicate those sacks, they are going to have to get outside the box a little bit, but that's also where I have the most faith in this pass rush, is through the simulated pressure, where you're sending pressure from a non-traditional pass rush role, linebacker, defensive back, that sort of thing, and blitzing, sending extra guys. You're looking at pieces like Kenneth Murray that can be used in this role. Jack Gibbons, I think, is kind of underrated for his ability to penetrate and get into the backfield. Jamal Adams, even Amani Hooker, Roger McCreary, these guys we've seen used as such pieces before. And then there's a class of young guys that play behind the defensive front that have that physical, aggressive mindset. James Williams, Otis Reese, maybe even Isaiah Eaton, JBL, like you said, Gabe Judy Lawley. There's a whole class of guys that play physical, tough football behind the defensive front that I think could be used as interesting chess pieces when we talk about pressure coming from outside the pure pass rushers, the simulated pressure, the blitzing, stuff like that. I think that's what Denard Wilson is going to deploy to make up for the lost production.
Yeah, and
where are you at on the blitzing?
Yeah, I completely agree that that's the direction that this is going to have to head. Because I think. And I'm as big a Landry fan as there is, as we'll get into later. And I think he is primed to have a big year, because I think some of the slowdown we saw from him last year was directly related to the ACL. And I think if you look at his back half of last season, he put up some of the best advanced metrics that he's put up in his entire career over the back half of last year, and then ultimately ended up with 10.5 sacks. I think 8 of those came in the last 9 or 10 weeks. So he was averaging about a sack a game over the back half of last season. So I think he's going to be your leading sack guy most likely, but I think he is a good fit for this defense because he's not like a Myles Garrett. He's not going to just line up and beat your tackle over and over again, but he's great on stunts and twists and all kinds of different, blitz techniques or blitz schemes that you can throw. Because you could even bring him off the ball. Like you don't have to line him up off the edge for him to be effective. And if you dig even deeper on that 2023 Tampa Bay team, which I agree, that's the team to look at more likely as far as like a comp for what this Titans defense is going to look like under Denard Wilson than the Ravens, simply because I think Bowles is a bigger influence on Wilson's mindset and how he's going to want to build this. But Yaya Diaby, who, by the way, I was a huge fan of coming out and had him as one of my guys on my pre-draft article last year. So I'm taking a victory lap here on Yaya. But after Yaya with 7.5 sacks, you go down to safety Antoine Winfield with 6 as their next leading sack guy. Vita Vea, nose tackle at 5.5. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, the other edge rusher at 5. Levante David, Shaq Barrett, Kalijah Kancey. So it gets, it's just a little bit of everybody, right? Safeties, linebackers, edge rushers, defensive tackles. It's going to be all of that group. And I think, you could throw in some Roger McCreary as well, who I do think is a good blitzer. L'Jarius Sneed is a good blitzer for his part as a corner. Not that you want him to do that all that often, but every now and then he's certainly more than capable of contributing in that role. I think it's going to be a little bit of everybody, and it's going to be the scheme that has to generate the pressure, not the players, more often than not. I think Simmons can win one-on-one. I think Sweat can win one-on-one to some degree. I think Landry can occasionally win one-on-one, so can Key. But none of those guys are dominant forces as pass rushers, not even Simmons. Simmons is good. He's the closest thing they've got that you need to pay attention to, but he doesn't take over games. He's not Aaron Donald. At least not on a consistent basis. He has flashes here and there, but
you wouldn't be saying that if you weren't blocked already.
No, true. Well, now that he can't see this, I'm free to say what I really feel about Jeffrey Simmons. He's a dog. No, he's awesome. But he's not like a take over the game kind of defensive pass rusher in the way that like Myles Garrett and these other guys we're talking about are. So I think it's got to be scheme over players to generate the pressure, plus the back end. And I think the corners being able to press, disrupt timing are going to be a huge part of this pass rush, being better than they were last year if they are going to be better.
And I'll say, whether it's Denard Wilson or Rand Carthon, tip of the cap for this Titan staff, recognizing the limitations and grabbing players that can help in this aspect of the defense.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, let's talk about Arden Key for a second, because this has been a question that me and Stoney has been. You were talking about Jack Gibby, but you were watching tape of Arden Key in preparation for this, and we were talking about Arden Key. You started talking about Arden Key's frame, and about the liability of him and being on defense. For the run plays and how maybe that is, part of it. And so I went through, I was like, well, his frame can't be that lean, can it? Like that rare. And
it looks like it.
You said it looked like it. So I could start going through the edge run defenders on PFF. I started going through them and looking at them. And the closest there was Alex Highsmith, who was roughly the same weight, which is 240 something. But he was like 6'4", 243 or 242, and Arden Key is 6'4", 242, so it's about an inch different. That's the closest one. Even Jalen Phillips, who I thought was super skinny coming out of college, has 20 pounds on Arden Key.
He's ripped.
So, Mike, this was a question that I put out to my Titans media sparrows to ask Arden Key or Tracy or Ben Bloom or even Brian Callen. They have not asked this yet, but it's a question I'm going to pose to you because me and Stoney have already kind of talked about. But he can't add enough weight to overcome that. I mean, we're talking about adding 20 pounds of muscle. Okay, so and saying that. Is that like how much can they fix the issue of his run defense? Because that is why he got called situational. And granted, they can still sign another player. Something that Rand Carthon talked about this morning on his stint with Ramon, Kayla, and Will was like, we're going to give some run to some of the young guys and see what they got. Because he says every year you hear of a pass rusher that just came from out of nowhere, a young pass rusher that came from out of nowhere. Why can't we be one of those teams? In response to adding a player there. Does not mean that they're going to like hitch their wagon to Caleb Murphy all throughout the year, but they're saying, let's give some guys some run. And if we're not seeing what we need, maybe we go get a Carl Lawson or something like that. But going back to Arden Key, who was called a situational pass rusher earlier or edge player, and that situation would be rushing the passer, not run defense. What can Ben Bloom, what can Denard Wilson throw into his toolbox that he hasn't been able to pick up anywhere else to make him worthy of being more than just a situational pass rusher and be the early down guy? I mean, like, is it technique, hand fighting? Like, what can he do to shed those blocks? Because he can't really gain 20 pounds of muscle in a year.
I don't even know that it's shedding blocks so much as it is he just gets washed out of plays. He's just not able to anchor against these bigger offensive tackles coming downhill at him. And that's just, it's a leverage problem for him because he is 6'5". He is a pretty long guy. I think his wingspan is like close to 7 feet, I want to say. But he was only 238, I think, coming out of LSU. He's always been on the leaner side. He looks lean. I just think he doesn't have the body mass of a Danico Autry, which is why Danico Autry was handling most of those early down edge reps in this defense last year, and then kind of kicking inside to rush on third downs and things like that to get Arden Key away from having to do that all the time. I mean, look, there's a reason that this guy's been in the league for 6 years, and last year was the most snaps he's ever played at 63% of defensive snaps. Before that, he'd only been at 63% once before as a rookie. And then the previous 4 years, he'd been at like 37, 45, 35, 41% snap rates. I think that's what he is. And that doesn't mean he's not an effective player. It's just, he's got to be used in that role. And that's my concern, is that they don't have that guy right now who can take the early down reps off of him and be effective. Now, if Jalen Harrell emerges, or, Tommy Rush or Caleb Murphy or what's the guy? I think one guy to keep like an eye on for some of this stuff would be like Isaiah Eaton, because I think his body type is like an early down kind of elephant end. It makes a lot of sense. I think they've got to find somebody to fill that role. And if not, I think you got to go like get a Carl Lawson. I think Emmanuel Ogba just went off the board. I think he went back to Miami. So that's a major hole in this defense right now, because I mean, Harold Landry's not a huge end either. He's good in run defense because I think he does play with leverage. He's a little bit shorter, so he's got some advantage there over what Key is at 6'5". But that's a problem to me, and I don't think he needs to be that guy in an ideal world.
Let me ask you, Stoney. I mean, how much do you think coaching changes? We don't know if they're improvements or not, but these coaching changes, scheme changes, the way that stuff is being taught differently, mistakes that are being corrected until they are actually corrected. The stuff that the players themselves are saying.
Yeah.
How much of that can actually help Arden Key? I mean, or is it just like, hey, a spade's a spade. He just is not going to be a great run defender, but maybe we can make him not to be a terrible run defender.
I will give Arden Key credit for this. I watched 4 games this week, kind of preparing for this show. And there were so many times that I watched a rep and thought, why does Shane Bowen, why does Mike Vrabel keep putting him in this situation? I forget the left tackle for the Falcons name, forgive me, but he's a good player. And you'd watch Arden Key go speed to power on this guy, and Key plays hard, man. I'm telling you, like, he's a scrapper out there. And you'd see him like throw everything he had into his speed to power move, and the left tackle just wouldn't budge. And so situations where these big guys get their hands on him, it's just the rep is over. And while he's good and active with his hands, I think he needs to get a little more consistent in batting those down. But from a coaching perspective, if you're going to put a guy like Key on an island with a big left tackle that you probably know the result of what's going to happen on that play before the ball's even snapped, you've got to add pressure behind him. Because in that situation, at least you know Arden Key is going to fight. Even if he's stopped, he's going to keep his feet moving. He's going to keep trying to wiggle and get around that guy. He's going to be preoccupied. So why not send Jamal Adams right up the gap there? And there were instances when I felt like Shane Bowen and company weren't doing that. And to be fair to them, it might have been because they felt like they needed every body possible in the secondary because the pass defense was so terrible. But you can see a path where Key can be effective if they pair him with one of these blitzing pieces that we've just talked about. I also saw a play in the Browns game where Jeffrey Simmons, right off the snap, just gets the left guard on skates and just drives him back in the pocket, and Key crosses inside around him to create that interior pressure. And I think that's a good use of his athleticism and speed as well. If you pair him with somebody else, I think he can be a highly effective pass rusher. And I think he's got the energy and the heart that you want a leader on your defense to have. You've just got to find him some complementary pieces and use them in smart ways to get the most out of the guy. And I think that Denard Wilson and this defense predicated on pressure and extra pieces and supplemental pass rushers, I think it could be the key to unlocking him. No pun intended, by the way.
I like it. No. Real quick, because we need to get the Harold Landry discussion here in just a second. So just real quick, it's going to be a lot of Arden Key versus J.C. Latham. J.C. Latham struggles with pass rushers. Arden Key struggles with big, long, rangy, strong offensive linemen. So this is a battle of two guys that are kind of like they're two polarizing magnets. Magnets with same polarization, like weakness on weakness and strength on weakness for each of them and all that kind of stuff. How important it's practice and everything, but how good is it to have like this iron sharpens iron, even for a vet like Arden Key to have to figure out ways to get around someone like J.C. Latham, which he's traditionally struggled to get around, but also good for J.C. Latham. Like, it's a very rare opportunity to shore up weaknesses for two players. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it helps, certainly. I think last year, I think everyone left training camp thinking Arden Key was about to be a breakout star, and it turns out Andre Dillard was just awful. So there can be some lessons that are not learned correctly from training camp, obviously, but I think it will help because I do think one thing that Key does well is kind of set up that speed rush and then hit with an inside counter move. And that is one of Latham's weaknesses, from his game. So I think him being able to work against that, somebody who does that pretty well, I think will help him. And it should help Key too. I mean, it's harder for me to say it's going to help Key because Key's been in the league for 6 years. He's played and practiced against all kinds of different tackles at this point. But I think Latham might benefit from it more so than the other way around.
I think Key getting reps against a guy that has incredible grip strength. J.C. Latham is one of the things that I loved about him coming out of college. I just talked about it a moment ago. When dudes got their hands on Key, it was a little easier for them to wash him out of a play. He's going to get reps all summer long going against some of the strongest hands in the draft, some of the strongest hands you can have for an offensive lineman, and he's going to be getting reps practicing knocking those down.
All right, Mike, we have the time to do it. And
Oh,
Stoney,
dear.
do you have to get off at 2:30?
I do have to
No.
get off at 2:30. Yeah.
Well, you just if we're going through this and we're not there yet and we're not done yet, you could just
Gotcha.
leave. It's nice having you on the show.
Thank you.
I have a list of 44 edge players. Now, some of these I know you're probably going to say that Harold Landry is better than. So, I mean, I don't expect Harold Landry to come in at 44th or 45th or anything. But most of these guys, I would say 37 of them to 38 of them had better pass rushing productivity than Harold Landry last year, according to PFF. And they all played at least 200 snaps. Pass rush snaps, by the way, not just total defense stats, 200 pass rush snaps. So I'm going to name them, and you're going to say yes or no, Harold Landry's, or they're better than Harold Landry, okay? So,
Okay.
yes,
Are we talking
they are
about
better
just
than Harold Landry.
this upcoming year, for this upcoming year?
How do you want to define it? Like, I mean, because I could see, I think yes. Who do you want for this coming? Who do you think is just a better pass rusher? Like, I mean, I think that's just in general that means the same thing. I think
because we're not doing career achievement and stuff like that.
No,
I mean,
not career achievements, but like, who do you think is actually better than Harold Landry right now? Like, who is the better pass rusher? Who's the better edge?
Okay, I'll try to get that. Oh, better, clearly.
Bryce Huff.
Better.
Oh, Trey Hendrickson.
Better.
Josh Allen. I'm not calling him Josh Allen Hines or Josh Hines Allen.
Better, but not by a lot, actually.
Okay. Nick Bonito.
No, Landry's better.
Don't sleep on Nick
Myles
Bonito.
Garrett, obviously. Dante Fowler.
Landry.
Okay, I figured so. Nick Bosa.
Bosa, clearly.
Yeah. Khalil Mack.
That one's close, actually. Now, I'd still go Mack, but it's getting closer.
Okay. Yeah. T.J. Watt. Andrew Van Ginkel.
Landry.
Interesting.
I mean, Van Ginkel's not like a true edge. He's very productive, but he's not like a true edge.
Aiden Hutchinson.
Hutchinson.
Tyquan Lewis.
Landry.
Bradley Chubb.
Landry.
Oh, you are.
Yes, because of the injury stuff. I don't think Chubb has been Chubb in
because Landry's never had any injuries. Okay.
Anyway, well, he's had exactly one injury in his entire career.
Josh Uche.
Landry.
Really? Josh Uche has been really good.
Well, he's like, so Huff is like a high end, like he's the best of the Uches. Or maybe Uche is a discount Huff. But Uche is like he's a rotational guy. You can't play him you can't play him like a starter.
Head of the table of the Uches. Malcolm Kuntz.
Landry.
Will Anderson.
Odafe
Owe.
Landry.
Interesting. I'm gonna put that one over here. Rashawn Gary. Zadarius Smith.
Landry at this point.
Yeah, I know we're both been big Zadarius Smith fans, but I think I would have to say at this stage I probably would choose Harold Landry. That is a tough one for me to admit, though. Greg Rousseau.
Landry.
Interesting. Baron Browning.
Landry.
Yeah, I figured so. Jalen Phillips.
Landry still.
Interesting. AJ Espinoza.
Landry.
Max Crosby.
Crosby.
George Karlaftis.
Landry. That one's close.
John. Yeah, you think it's close?
I think it's close. I think Karlaftis is good.
I think he's good too.
Jonathan Grenard. Jonathan Cooper.
Landry.
Daniil Hunter. Durance Armstrong.
Landry.
Okay. Montez Sweat.
Yeah.
Boy Mafe.
Landry.
Alex Highsmith.
Landry.
I
think if you put Landry across from TJ Watt, Landry would be putting up crazy numbers.
Fair point.
Except for Landry needs Bud Dupree. Okay, John Franklin Myers.
Landry.
I'm kind of surprised. I thought you were a John Franklin Myers guy.
I do like
Joey
him. I'll take Landry at this point.
Oh, interesting.
Joey
Jermaine
Bosa's
Johnson.
play 6 games this year. Jermaine Johnson, close, but I'll take Landry.
Yeah, I would too. Brennan Graham.
Landry.
By the way, all these players were ranked higher on PFF than Harold Landry.
As far as what pass rush grade or pass rush
productivity?
Okay.
Yeah, productivity.
Yeah. Okay.
Hassan Reddick.
Reddick.
Okay. That I think that was the end. All these guys are going to be after him, but there were various injuries and stuff, so they weren't on the list or whatever.
Okay.
DeMarcus Lawrence.
Landry at this point.
Brian Burns.
You know what? I'll actually say Landry here. I think Burns is good.
Liar. You're just.
I think Burns is good, but I think he's a little overrated.
So we need to be trading Harold Landry for what Brian Burns got traded for, is what you're saying.
Maybe.
Yeah. Cam Jordan.
Landry.
Von Miller.
Landry.
Matt Judon.
Judon, actually.
Uchenna Nwosu.
Landry.
Okay. So you have Landry is the 17th best edge rusher, is what you have pretty much have said.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair.
When in reality, he is the 29th best edge rusher. When you talk about living in reality and productivity and stuff.
I don't think so. Well, if you talk about productivity, I mean, he's 12th. He's 12th in sacks per game over the last 3 years.
Oh, man.
But
I just wanted to see how high you actually had him. Because I do think you're wrong on Chubb. I think you're wrong on Jalen Phillips. And I think you're wrong on... Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. Brian Burns. You actually have him at 18th. I forgot. I accidentally moved Hassan Reddick over in the wrong column. But you have him at 18th.
I mean, Jalen Phillips yet to break 8.5 sacks in a season.
I mean, he's still young, and he did it quicker. He did it quicker
3
than
years.
Better sacks
He's
than
been in the
Harold
league for
Landry
3 years.
Hey, I've got to bounce.
Well, that will do for us.
Can I get my one more thing in and then bounce? Yeah. One more thing. You're talking about.
We're going to close it off anyway.
The waiver wire and player additions. Watch the Packers safety room, because they signed Xavier McKinney, but then they went and drafted Javon Bullard, Evan Williams, and Ketan Oladapo. If one of those guys ends up not making the roster, make the call, Rand. Make the call. I got to go.
That will do it for us. We got Harold Landry, according to Mike. He is the 18th best pass rusher in the league.
I think that's totally fair.
According to me, he is the 29th best pass rusher in the league, which is probably more actual what the NFL feels is probably where he's at. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. But that has been a productive show. We talked about a lot. I know there's a lot of people
almost as productive
out there
as
now.
Harold Landry.
Yeah, just remember what I said about DeAndre Hopkins and Tavondre Sweat hanging out and why they were talking shit to each other, because they've been hanging out. And don't get overblown, because now Jim Wyatt has put in there that a couple of vets were razzing Tavondre Sweat for being tired, which is pretty normal. And then he follows that up with, a lot of players were really tired. Admittedly, it was a really tough day. But vets hazing rookies is pretty normal in the league. Of course, it's taking a negative spin in the Tavondre Sweat hate cycle. That is a few accounts on this on Twitter and stuff. So I'm going to stay out of it on Twitter, even though it's really hard for me to do. But Mike, what you wrote an article over at podcarsky.com. You did a headline and an under the radar story for every position group. Which is really hard, because I don't think this Malik Willis, Mason Rudolph thing, I think it's a total farce that there's an actual battle. And then you had to write about it as an under radar storyline. But what else would you put under the quarterback spot? Because Will Levis is the big story. So I don't blame you or anything on that. But it's a really good article. You did it for every position group, paulkarski.com. So make sure you go see that. On stackandinbox.com, we're going to have, I think, Jack Gibby this week. Stoney left, but he fully admits and is committed to the point that they are trying to red pill us, fool us into thinking that Jack Gibby is a starter. they're red pilling us, and he breaks down the tape and Jack Gibbons for Friday's Second Inbox Film Friday. For Bluegrass Beverages, who is our sponsor, 50 years in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Get all your liquor from over there. But for Mike, I'm Zach, and for Stoney, this has been Football and Other F Words, and you have just been effed.